Ready, Jennifer? Hi, Keith. Whoop. Oh, what happened? Oh, dear. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Electoral Area Services Committee meeting for March 6th. I'd like to acknowledge that we are on the territory of the Coast Salish people and welcome you all. And I'm looking for an approval of the agenda with one new business item. And the item is OCP rezoning application in Honeymoon Bay. Staff would like to provide the committee with an update on the status of this application. So with that new business item, I'd look for an approval. It's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? All in favor? Any opposed? Motion's carried. Moving on now to the adoption of the minutes of the Electoral Area Services meeting of February 20th. So moved. There a seconder? All in favor? Any opposed? Motion is carried. Is there any business arising from the minutes? Mr. Blackwell.
There's no business arising, Madam Chair.
Thank you. We'll move now into the public input period. The purpose of the public input period is to provide the public with an opportunity to comment on an agenda item. So is there anybody from the gallery that wishes to speak? Welcome. Press the button, please.
Hello, I'm Harish Shea. I am the applicant for the rezoning number RZ18B01 to rezone Rosedale Road 3737 and 3755 from A2 to A2C. Hope you don't mind me reading because my mind will go blank otherwise. First of all, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank every one of you for referring this back for more study. I'm really hopeful that we can all come to some mutually agreed upon solution that will work for all involved parties. I fully understand how some people may have thought the worst, especially those that are familiar with the bunker at Island View Road as you're heading out towards the ferries in Swartz Bay. I'd be really upset if that was going into my area too. And I have no intentions whatsoever of putting something like that on my property. I would like to stay within the A2 zoning look and make it appear like perhaps a riding academy or something like that. And I had no idea that so many members or neighbors would be so opposed to us offering employment to others that may be in need of securing good paying jobs to help support their families. But this too, I feel, can be rectified with the scaling back on the size and perhaps automating procedures such as auto feeding and trimming machines, and basically just run it as any other mom and pop operation with just the help from immediate family members. I do feel we have addressed all the other legitimate concerns that were brought up by the neighbors from far and wide. When we purchase property, we purposely search for agricultural properties that would allow us to do an horticultural endeavor, so when we reach retirement, we could have a means to supplement our retirement income. In no way were our intentions to become industrial or commercial or just plain residential. Nor were we aware that the zoning would be changed on us, making cannabis a non-agricultural crop. It should be known that we've been growing cannabis legally with our Health Canada medical licenses long before these changes came into effect. Also with the CVRD knowledge, the RCMP and the fire department's knowledge as well, with no complaints or incidences. And I did bring the letter from the fire department that my husband read out last week. I don't know if that has been sent to anybody or used. And I brought further letters of support from neighbors that I did submit over the weekend. I don't know if everybody has got those yet. If you're interested, I have everything here for you. Thank you for hearing me.
Thank you so much. Is there anybody else that wishes to make a comment on today's agenda?
Yeah, good evening, good afternoon. My name is Jordy Haslam. I own the farm adjoining the Shays property. I have a residential house within a couple hundred feet of where their grow is going to go. When I first heard about this, I had major concerns about the pollution. First off, water pollution from residue coming out of the operation. I had concerns about noise, smell, traffic, where they were going to get their water from, because all this would affect my farm. If they took too much water out of the ground, of course, I wouldn't have enough water for my farm. I have a 31 acre farm there. You know, the concerns about traffic, so if they employ 5 or 6 people, we get 5 or 6 more people driving. They built the Kinsale Trestle a few years back, and the traffic on that Riverside Road, which was never upgraded, is horrendous. It's just, I've come across the buses, the big tourist buses, motorhomes, etc. So the traffic shouldn't be a concern. A little bit about my background is I spent 32 years in the Navy and the Navy Reserves. I was a correctional officer for 16 years, federal and provincial. I spent most of my life dead against any sort of drugs, any kind. And the smell of pot, to me, is the most putrid smell you can come across. But I believe in the medical cannabis. One day I may need it. There's too much evidence out there that proves that this is helpful to people. The piece of property they've taken is not primary farmland. But they will put the grow on that land and make it produce. They've allowed in different areas, we've lost our greenhouses, we're losing farmland. Try to go to a store today and try to find local BC products that are grown in our greenhouses. It's becoming very difficult. Most of our products are being imported. That's because the grow-ops, the mega companies are coming in with deep pockets, and they are taking over the greenhouse operations and the farm operations. These people are using land that would never be used for that. So, I don't think it should be a major concern. So I support this application completely. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Haslam. Is there anyone else? We have 2 more minutes. Yes, yes, welcome. Oh, you turned it off. Sorry, I did hear you.
It's on.
Yeah,
Can you hear me at the back of the room?
Yes.
Thank you. My name is John Shea. I'm a co-respondent for the rezoning. We've been involved in this endeavor for quite some time. As soon as we put the sign up last July, it became aware that there was a few people concerned about it, and there was also a couple of individuals that seemed to be making a concerted effort to make sure that it didn't fly for us. We've tried everything, we've filled out everything, we've done everything, and we've answered questions. I would like to add to the letter the fire chief actually sent out. In 2012, there was another medical cannabis operation, legal, that caught fire. And the fire was there in a timely fashion from Cowichan and put the fire out and saved the residents. And that evening, we put up the guy's wife and child. We're not looking to disrupt the neighborhood or change the flavor. We're looking to provide ourselves an agricultural alternative in our retirement. And we are more than happy to accommodate what people want. And eventually, it's going to be a family operation. It's not going to be an industrial or commercial, and that was never the intent. Thank you for your time.
thank you very much, Mr. Shea. And seeing no one else, we will move forward to our next portion, which is correspondence. Grant and aid request, Electoral Area I, Yubo, Mead Creek, Lake Cowichan School. Mr. Blackwell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The recommendation before you is that it be recommended to the board that a grant and aid Electoral Area I, Yubo-Mead Creek, in the amount of $500 be provided to Lake Cowichan School for a bursary for graduating student residing in Electoral Area I, Yubo-Mead Creek.
Moved, second. Any discussion? All in favor? Any opposed? Motion's carried. Moving on now to unfinished business, number 9. UB1, Board of Variance Establishment Bylaw. Ms. Garnett, welcome.
Thank you. At the previous Electoral Area Services Committee meeting, the Board of Variance Establishment Bylaw was presented, and this committee asked that the existing Board of Variance Bylaw be attached to the report, so that has been done, and the information is before you.
Okay. Looking to committee's pleasure, moving the recommendation, is the mover and seconder, and then any discussion? Director Kuhn. Okay, oh, you want to call the recommendation, Mr. Blackwell?
Thank you, Madam Chair. The recommendation before you is that it be recommended to the board that the Board of Variance Establishment Bylaw number 4262 be forwarded to the board for consideration of 3 readings and adoption.
All in favor? Any opposed? Motion is carried. Moving on now to unfinished business 2, Mr. Tippett, an application for Rosedale Road.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't have a presentation prepared. The matter was referred back to committee, and it's the committee's pleasure what to do. I think I could maybe serve as an answerer of any questions, or if there are any sort of technical issues that the committee member wants to know about, I'll try my best to answer them, but I don't really have anything to present at this time.
Thank you. Is there any questions for Mr. Tippett? We were sent all the relevant information. There was options there as well in the resolution. Looking to the committee. Director Acton?
Thank you, Madam Chair. My understanding, there's a few complexities that are hard to reiterate verbally. So do you think I'm thinking it might be a good idea to refer it back to staff, and I've got a few things to ask for.
Madam Chair, with your permission, yes, if you're asking my advice, I would agree that it probably makes sense to send it back to staff for further work, possibly a report with more options than appeared in the original report, possibly to draft bylaw as well, so that the committee can take a look at what the actual amendment would look like and, focus on that. And we would be happy to do that work for the committee if that's your pleasure.
Okay, so it's been moved and that's a motion. It's been seconded by Director Morrison. And we'll speak now on the referral. Is there anybody on referral? Director Acton.
Well, I'd like to suggest what items we might be looking for. Would that be part of the referral motion?
I believe that's what I've heard from staff.
Okay, so
Yeah.
one, some options of zoning to permit back to what the legal non-conforming allowed as an option, to see what that looks like. Better explanation of the additional zoning. Let me know that there's discussion now of 1,100 square foot. 11,000 square foot building. And clarity on which of the three sites of the building, because usually at this stage we know where it's going. And since it's changed so many times, I'd also like to have it go back to the APC for their input.
Mr. Tippett.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, I was expecting to write a report back to this committee. We could do that and maybe have the committee select a preferred option and then refer it back to the APC? Is that what you're suggesting? Or would you rather see these options go back to the APC?
I feel like it went to the APC a little bit unclear too. If we didn't have those, we would have had the site, the sizing, there was there was talk, there was error of how the allowable building site. It became discussion about the site and it became discussion about the building. So, we value our APC's input, and I think there's been a lot that's happened since they saw the application. So wherever the committee or staff feels that the APC should give input is fine with me. I don't want to change the process, but to me, I think they could look at it again.
Madam Chair, again, that's at the pleasure of the committee. If they wish to ask for further APC input, that would be fine. I would suggest, if that's the case, that staff maybe write another report to the APC summarizing some of these issues and refrain from writing a draft bylaw or the detailed options report to this committee until after the APC meets, so we can incorporate whatever comments they have into the final report to committee, if that's your preference. Just procedurally, I think it would be a bit strange to provide them with, final options that we would otherwise be presenting to the committee. So anyway, just either way it could work. We'll just have to take a slightly different approach.
Director Morrison.
I'm glad to see this file back at the committee, and I'm wanting to consider the bylaws and the like. I'm really have issues with given the workload and pressure that this particular department has, and if I'm recalling the comments from the APC on the initial application, they seem to be favorable, and that's what I understand us to be looking for from our APC is an indication as to move forward or not, and I think that's happened, and I think it's beyond the scope of referring it back for citing and sizing and the likes. We've got professional staff that are responsible for ensuring that it meets the proposed change to zones. So, given the amount of work that's been done thus far, if the director has a couple of questions and thoughts about tightening things up and having clear, concise bylaws, I absolutely agree with that. And just one other item, and given that this is new territory for all of us, and I thought we'd already had an understanding from staff that when we referred or when we delegated directors to public hearings, that we were going to delegate the area director in which it's located, the area director neighboring, and another director from throughout the region. And I'm seeing that isn't the case in the recommendation in one of the previous reports, but wondering about the merit of the newness of this type of application, whether other directors on this committee would like to be sitting in on that public hearing. I think it's important that we get a grasp of how our communities are feeling about this sort of change to zones, because I think they're coming to all of our areas. So I support it going back, getting a new staff report. I'm really leery about the time and effort that it would take to send this back to the APC.
Director Nicholson?
I think this is a good thing to continue to study this a little bit more, because this is a really important decision. It is a new area for us, and I think taking our time is really important. And I think sending it, before we jump into bylaws, I think it would be useful to have the community's, the APC's comment again. I remain concerned about the scale that's being proposed.
This is on the referral.
Yeah, and so I really think that having a look at that as part of the further study is important. I am not clear, and I think it needs to be really clear when this material goes to the APC, that the things that we can control and the things that we can't control are clear. So my understanding is that we don't have a lot of control over whether or not they have a system that will prevent water pollution. We don't have a lot of control over whether they have appropriate odor control. Certainly the traffic and employees we don't have control over. And I think probably most importantly, in the Coxsila watershed, we have a significant water issues. And I am not clear, and I think maybe the applicants would be wise to have a conversation with the province about this, but I am not clear that they're giving out water licenses at this point, because there's such a concern about the watershed. So, I think those things really, we need to go slowly, and I think that we really need to understand what it is that we're approving. Because I personally think that this scale of operation, 11,000, how many square feet is it? 11,000 square feet, which is, like my house is maybe 2,000 square feet. That to me is a huge operation for this neighborhood. And I'm not, I don't even know if 11,000 would be possible for it to be a family-based business. Family-based business is, that's the kind of thing we're talking, kind of neighborhood we're talking about, and I think anything more is potentially problematic. So we need to go slowly and look at this really carefully. And so I would certainly support it going back to the APC with some of these questions provided in the report, answered in the report.
Director Kuhn?
I'm not in favor of referring this back to the APC. And I don't think we should make this any more complicated than it is. It's not a big commercial entity. I was out there because I wanted to see what does the area look like. And I don't know how many of you have been out there, but it's basically at the end or close to the end of a dirt road. There's a house here, then you can sense there's a house over there, and there's one here. There are large pieces of property. It's not like it's a densely populated area. And my attitude is simply this: if we cannot accommodate a business that is that green out in the boonies, then man, we should pack up and go home.
Director Acton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. If it sounds like sending it to the APC is going to create too much work for staff, I'm fine with that not being on the list of expectations. But also looking at the bigger picture, it might be interesting to send this to Economic Development Cowichan for their input of, where do we want to see these kind of facilities, and maybe even to actually say whether Director Nicholson's statement is correct or not, which, we were previously talking about 35,000 or 33,000 square feet, and now it's 11,000 square feet. So is that a big operation? But what does that look like? And so what is that compared to other types of businesses doing the same kind of,
Mr. Blackwell.
just so we understand better what we're talking about, and maybe Economic Development Cowichan has some advice for us so that we do this properly going forward.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just for clarification, part of the discussion that staff will, I think, need to focus on is providing a deeper understanding of use classifications, meaning that certain land uses fit under certain use classifications. So horticulture, for instance, includes a number of different types of uses. And I think what staff needs to do is provide more clarity so that the committee is in a better position to understand where the latitude exists with regard to singling out certain commodity types. In other words, turning our mind to explaining what agriculture is, what agriculture isn't, rather than dictating at a staff level what is appropriate commodity to grow or not appropriate commodity to grow. Because if staff does that, what it can do is pit industries against one another by trying to subjectively indicate that a certain type of agriculture, a certain type of horticulture, and the type of crop associated with that generates greater or lesser impacts. And of course, it's almost impossible to do that. That's largely a function of the farm operation and so forth. So there's a lot of work that staff, I think, need to do to help tease this out so that the committee can rely on that bedrock of information to inform your decision. The other piece I just wanted to point out for clarification too is that zoning doesn't guarantee land use. So although a zone may be applied to a piece of property, there may be other limitations or permitting that might be required to undertake or realize the range of uses permitted under that zone. So I'm sure you can recall an example out at Lake Cowichan where there is a zone in place that accommodates a certain type of use, but the water conditions out there don't accommodate that. So zoning doesn't guarantee transference into the actual use that the zone permits. I don't know if that helps.
Director Wilson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. If I'm tend to agree with Director Kuhn over there. Let's not make this any more complicated than what it already is. If I'm understanding this correctly, and Mr. Blackwell will be able to clarify for me, the present zoning of A2 would allow for other uses which would be far, or could be far more destructive to the environment and to leachates, etc., without any further applications. Is that true? So what I'm saying is basically what I've seen so far is that the application that's being asked for now could prevent a lot of contamination that could happen with other uses that could be provided, could be allowed on that property.
Mr. Blackwell.
Thank you. Through you to Director Wilson. That's a tricky one to answer. The best way I can answer that is this, that a lot of the impacts associated with use in the agricultural realm are a function of farm management practices. So you can have two agricultural producers producing the same commodities. Let's say, for instance, carrots. one grower is particular with how they manage the land and the other is not. And they change the oil of the tractor right beside the creek and whoops, the can gets knocked over and away she goes. So, that's a dramatic example of what I'm saying. So rather than try to figure out which agricultural enterprise may create a greater impact, it's better to look at the type of use and say, does this type of use normally generate impacts that are untenable or can otherwise not be mitigated to a reasonable extent? And if that's the case, then the zone needs to change to something that is better reflective of the community's values. But having a zone that says you can do one thing but not giving effect to that by other limitations creates a bit of a bind.
Follow up.
Thank you for that, Mr. Blackwell. So, and if I am understanding it correct, the building and the safeguards and the filters and everything that are being proposed here should have a fairly minimal effect. If they're using recycled water, they're having air filters for odor and all the rest of it, should have a fairly low profile effect on the area, much less than, let's say, growing carrots or whatever you want to call it.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you to Director Wilson. I don't really want to get into measuring the degree of impact. What I can say is that agricultural uses frequently come with impacts. Agricultural areas really should be considered, in my personal opinion, as industrial parks specific to agricultural food production. And the reason I say that is because they use heavy equipment. They frequently use chemicals and generate noise and smell and so forth. And the farming community typically needs the space to be able to undertake those activities with a reasonable degree of impunity. And the Farm Practices Protection Act gives some latitude to agricultural producers with regard to undertaking normal farm practices. So again, it's hard to say whether the proposed land use will create greater or lesser impacts. There is certainly information provided by the applicant that addresses things that you refer to, like odor control, which is a requirement of the federal government. It's not something that the regional district has authority over in this regard, but the federal government does. So with regard to your question, there is a list that Mr. Tippett has with regard to a number of these questions. But as I say, to conclude, in general, agriculture frequently comes with impacts.
Director Morrison.
Yeah, thank you. And, this is starting to feel an awful lot like denial by delay. And I'm really gravely concerned about this because we've heard the applicant come forward and say, we've heard from the community about trying to do a closed loop irrigation system. We've heard from the community about various different concerns. And, I was prepared to come into this meeting and recommend the option that was recommended by the staff and move forward and get on with this. And then I heard the director for the area had some other ideas and wanted to be supportive of that. But, when I'm hearing concerns about, we have to be moving slowly on this, they've been growing under federal government permit for, I think, a decade with not a lot of neighborhood awareness of what's going on. And and regardless of what we do, they will be operating under federal government permit, which is going to have much higher and more stringent regulations than we could ever have to put in or hope to put in place on something like this. So, I think I heard the applicants standing up here during the public input period saying that in response to what they're hearing about the number of employees that might be coming to work in their business might be reduced and lowered so that it's just family members. I'm thinking, what a shame. Here we've got a great new industry that's popping up in this community, and they're saying, well, if they don't want employees coming, we'll restrict it. Like, this is an economic development opportunity, and now it sounds like our applicants, in an attempt to appease every aspect of our demands, is narrowing the scope and the focus of what this could be. And I'm really concerned that if we keep delaying and delaying and delaying, they're gonna be beyond their retirement years and not be able to benefit from the zoning that they could benefit from if we proceed expeditiously.
Director Nicholson, Acton, and Salmon.
Thank you. I don't think this is denial by delay. If I recall, we did deny it, and it's been brought back. So I think what we need to do at this point is be very careful that we have all the information. I think to a large part, this is about the scale of the operation. We have no experience with these kind of operations at this kind of scale. What we have is a long litany of problems with cannabis grow-ops in various neighborhoods that have been inappropriately located and caused a great deal of nuisance. All the risk with this particular application will be bared by the neighbors. And we have heard at the public meeting, a large percentage of the residents have concerns. And so our job is to make sure that those concerns would be addressed. We know that we don't have control over very much about the operation. We have the decision about allowing it to happen in this area, but other than that, there isn't much that we can control about how well it's managed or not managed. And land use is a long-term thing. It isn't specific to a particular owner. I am really interested in this push on the economic development front. It seems to me that if, from an economic development perspective, this would not be a good location. And I appreciate Director Acton's comment that maybe we should get some input from the economic development folks on the kinds of criteria, in addition to the land use criteria, that we should be thinking about when we get these kind of applications, because this is just going to be the first of probably many. And so we don't have a lot of options about where we start to steer these kinds of applications. I just have a sense that this isn't the right place for it, and I wouldn't want to be setting up a bunch of ad hoc, poorly planned, you know, we talk about compact communities and trying to connect services and everything, and to me this is just not right. And just to follow up on this farm practices issue, you have to remember that this is an agriculturally zoned area, but it's A2, so it's small lot agriculture. People can subdivide down to 5 acres. That's a very small kind of agricultural system. So the scale of the agriculture and how we define it in our official community plans ought to be really clear for A2, and I don't think it is at the moment.
Director Acton?
Thank you. This is to referral. We're not trying to delay it. I think that Mr. Tippett actually agreed with myself when I asked and presented that there's still some information that's not even included in our package, and that there's some items that could be better explained as well. So it's just about we're bringing this back. We brought this back, so if there's more information and some new information as well, then we should see it come back.
Director Salmon on the referral.
Thank you. Yeah, briefly, I also would like to see more information. We've had the local director in favor. We've heard the staff say it's a good idea. I'll be voting in favor of this motion.
Great, so I'll call the question. All those, or what is, do you all?
It's been moved and seconded.
Yes, it has. Yeah. So I'm going to call the question. All in. Well, it's refer back to staff. That's it. For further analysis.
So I've recorded all.
Mr. Blackwell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I believe the resolution just needs to state that the application be referred back to staff for further analysis. I've recorded the items that you've indicated. Staff will be adding to that list to make sure that we provide as much information to support your decision-making as possible.
No. Okay, I'm going to call the question. All in favor? Opposed? Motion is carried. Moving on now to unfinished business 3, and I'd like to welcome Brian Dennison.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This item is regarding the Central Sector Liquid Waste Management Plan, which is one of our responsibilities. The partners in the plan are the Municipality of North Cowichan, City of Duncan, Cowichan Tribes, and our own electoral areas D and E. Liquid waste management plans, for the new directors that maybe aren't too familiar with it, you don't see a lot of new plans nowadays, but there were a lot of them initiated in the 90s, which this one was. And the idea is in a kind of holistic way to look at liquid waste, drainage, and in various related environmental issues that come from that, and to come up with a comprehensive plan in the long term to deal with those issues. And then once you create the plan, from time to time, as conditions change and new issues come up, you amend them in a formal sort of way. There's an extensive public consultation as part of it, and in the end, it's approved by the minister, signed off by the Minister of Environment. So in our own case, for this particular one, the Central Sector Plan, we started a third amendment to the plan. Some other issues were dealt with prior to that, to relocate the existing Joint Utilities Board outfall from the Cowichan River out towards Satellite Channel, almost in Satellite Channel, the end of Cowichan Bay. We, again, the CVRD, went through that whole process, carried out consultation of various sorts, and submitted about 3 years ago the plan document, the amendment documents for approval from the ministry. Unfortunately, we haven't heard anything from them yet. So things move slowly with the province. The elements that we covered in the plan process were particularly to do with the environmental aspects and a number of other constraints, siting constraints, to do with the terminus of the outfall. In other words, where the discharge is from the effluent that would actually be going into the ocean. The routing element was left with the owners of the JUB, the Municipality of North Cowichan and the City of Duncan, to work that out after the submission of the plan documents. And also there was further requirements on environmental impact assessment. A phase 2 environmental impact assessment was to be done, and they would be doing that as well. Shortly after the documents were submitted, now almost 3 years ago, one of our major constraints were federal anchoring restrictions. There's these zones where you can't have anything going inside of them because it's intended for anchoring of large vessels. And unfortunately, after we went through all that work, the federal government reworked them in the Cowichan Bay area, and they're all different now, quite substantially different than they were at the time. So that's one issue that is now before us, and also there's been ongoing First Nations concerns as well. There's a lot of fisheries and other elements related to First Nations interests, and that's still out there, needing further examination. So we have here Mr. Clay Reitzma from the Municipality of North Cowichan, who's got it on his plate to deal with this complex issue. And he's here to give us a presentation on, just an update on how that's going with the outfall project itself. And also for the directors that are not maybe that aware, the JUB system itself, how it functions, the kind of standards that it meets. There's a lot of, at least in the past, there's been a lot of sort of misunderstanding or misperception of the system and its performance. So he's going to tell us a bit about that as well.
Great.
So we have Clay.
Thank you.
Oh, I don't know how to, we got an expert over here.
Okay, how do I get to
Engineers,
mine?
we don't touch this
Yeah,
stuff.
I'm
Yeah.
getting old, though.
Welcome, Clay.
Slipping on the technology.
Good job, Brian. I almost feel like I don't have to present. First, I'd like to just say thank you very much for having me here today, and I apologize. I was supposed to appear at your March 6th or February 20th meeting. We've got a lot of changes going on at North Cowichan these days, and so I got double booked, and so I had to reschedule to today. So I apologize for that. Okay, well, I thought I knew PowerPoint, but this is a different screen than I'm used to. So how do I put it in presentation? Oh, it is in presentation mode. I got you. Okay.
So you can just either click it or. Yeah.
Okay, so what's on here is not up there. That's great, though.
It just shows you what's next.
Yeah, okay. So I thought that, first let me say there's a lot of slides. I'm going to whip through these slides pretty quickly and focus in on some key areas. the reason I've done it this way is because my experience has been this, to get across to people what the JUB is really all about and what the outfall project is really all about, you need some detail. And it's better to have it so you can read it beforehand and take it away with you, and you don't have to necessarily phone me or rely on me for all the information. So I'm going to skip to some highlights. The other thing I'd like to say is that when I first started doing these presentations, I just presented on the outfall project, and what I found was happening was, as Brian alluded to earlier, is that folks were asking me, like, what's coming out the pipe? Is there going to be poop coming out the pipe? Am I going to have sewage on my boat? And I said, oh my goodness, we got to get this straightened away. So when I do these presentations, particularly to new boards, new councils, or people who have not been exposed to the JUB treatment plant, I always want to do a JUB presentation. So I'll start with that first, and then I'll move on to the outfall. Okay. So the JUB is Joint Utilities Board Lagoons. That's what it means. I call it STP, which is short for Sewage Treatment Plant. So the slides that I've provided you with get into these major topics. I'm going to focus in on the red ones, and I'm going to only discuss in a glancing way some of the points on the other slides, just so that we're not here for 2 hours, okay? So again, you can just read through the history yourself. You probably already read it. I don't want to get too much into the history, other than I would say, that 1961, that's when the facility was first constructed, and it's morphed over the years, so it's been there a while. Some key dates: May 11, 2000, the Ministry of Environment approved the CVRD Central Sector Liquid Waste Management Plan, of which the JUB is a part. Brian alluded to that earlier. And then in May, August, September, you'll notice the line starts here. We didn't have to start removing phosphorus till 2003. And as you can see, it's well within compliance. And the other thing we have to measure is toxicity. So what they do here is they take a sample of the effluent, they aerate it heavily, and then they put fish in there, and they see how many survive over a 96-hour period. We have to have at least 50% of the fish survive in 96 hours in 100% effluent, so that's what that means. So these are the survival rates. And so this is fish in 100% effluent. So by the time it's in the river, you dilute it once or twice or 3 times. There's no issue with respect to toxicity. So this is the table I was referring to, where I actually take all the averaging out, and I tell you how many samples we took and how many samples were in compliance for each one of those graphs, okay? And so in total, the compliance rate is, 99, it's probably 99.8%, I rounded it off. Which is, I don't think there's probably not a treatment plant in BC that doesn't have a non-compliant somewhere. Because in the BC regs, they don't average anything. It's a maximum upset limit. So you have one bad day, and plants can get belly aches. They have a bad day. Maybe the sludge doesn't settle, and you get a high BOD or a high TSS number. So for a lagoon system, these are really good numbers. I would also mention that some of these numbers are from data early on in the facility, just after the upgrades, when we was going through some teething pains as we were figuring out how to operate it well. The other thing we have to monitor is the river. So the ministry requires in the summer, July, August, and September, that we go out to the river and we monitor what the water quality is upstream of the outfall, 50 meters upstream, and then they get us to measure the water quality 200 meters downstream. And so the blue line is upstream, and the orange line is downstream. So what's interesting is that one, and this is a problem we see a lot, is quite often when we measure coliforms in the river, upstream and downstream, we basically don't see any difference because the coliform numbers are so low. But we do see excursions from time to time upstream. And usually they transfer downstream, so they go up together. And this is just an odd reading that we got where we had one upstream that was 300. So something happened. It didn't get picked up downstream, probably because it was in a thin wedge of water that just travel right past the outfall. This could be anything. It could just be a fluke sample. It could be bird droppings. It could be failing septic systems. If there was a storm, it could be stormwater runoff. So this is pH, and this is just showing the range we have to be between. And as you can see, the river and the upstream and downstream of the outfall mimic each other pretty closely. There's a small excursion here. None of these things have the ministry gotten too wound up about. A drop in pH like this is minor. So DO in the river, the amount of dissolved oxygen for fish, we want to be above the orange line. The orange line is the is the impaired, and the red line is lethal for fish. So we're above both lines. That's great. And so these are the, similar to the other slides, this is the level of compliance with respect to those parameters upstream and downstream. So you can see that they're pretty close. What's interesting is the compliance upstream is actually worse than downstream. Which I'm not suggesting that the lagoons are cleaning the river up. I'm just suggesting that they're not having an impact, okay, with respect to these parameters at least. That's just summarizing the results. And I thought since I was leaving you with all these slides with these technical terms that I'd give you a glossary so you know what I'm talking about. So that's the synopsis of the performance of the lagoons and what the lagoons are. And
Great
maybe
job.
this would be a good time for questions.
Sure, thank you so much, Clay. Very informative. You never know how much you're going to learn once you're in local government. Director Salmon.
So, thank you. So, is this whole thing considered primary treatment? Secondary?
It's interesting. It's none of them. It's a hybrid secondary tertiary. Tertiary because of the phosphorus removal. Secondary because of the way the aerators move. What defines secondary treatment is when you, in a smaller plant, like a mechanical plant, you remove the sludges in a clarifier, a settling tank, and you recirculate them back to cell 1 in this case. We don't have a way to remove the solids and recirculate them, but because these diffusers move, the lagoons are able to maintain a bit of a bug population in there, and that's what kind of makes it a little bit secondary, but it's not full-blown. And it's not full-blown tertiary, but there's an element of it there with the phosphorus removal.
Okay.
Follow up?
Yeah, just to compare to Victoria then with their need to upgrade, and you mentioned possible upgrades in the future, but I take it this, as is all up to standard as far as the outfall into satellite channel, it's fine.
Yeah. Well, so when the ministry signs off on the amendment, assuming that happens, and if we get to an outfall in satellite channel, I'll be surprised if the ministry doesn't, they'll have to redo the operating certificate, right? That's part of the process, because we're not discharging to the river anymore. The operating certificate gets updated by the MOE. And what they'll do is they'll look at this facility and they'll say, okay, well, what does the stage 2 environmental impact study say about the receipts? And said, you know, what do you think about this? And part of that process involved presenting on several other options that have been considered over the years. So North Cowichan had undertaken some studies to look at ground disposal, for example, of effluent through infiltration chambers. We looked at the possibility of discharging effluent to Quamachin Lake to flush it more. That's a possibility, but I don't recommend it. We looked at going to Catalyst at one point and sending either raw sewage there or treated effluent. We revisited that one as part of a subsequent process to the amendment, but it didn't work out. So there were other options looked at, and the best option, and it's the option that the ministry prefers, quite frankly, is ocean outfall. It's the safest option in our case. So we we went through the amendment process and submitted it, I don't know exactly when, Brian, was it late 2015 or? Oh, so it's, geez, it's even worse.
No, sorry, 2016.
2016,
Yeah,
okay.
So it's just about 3 years.
Okay, so in 2016, we submitted the amendment. We also submitted 2 funding applications. And we got money. So that's normally a good thing. We got $12 million to fund a $28 million project. The problem is that when I picked up the project thinking I have a project, I found out that I actually don't have a project because there's some opposition out there too. Or, I wouldn't say opposition, but there's concerns about the lack of consultation or insufficient consultation. This is not entirely surprising. This happens all the time. And I would say that when you're relocating an outfall, this pause that we have to take to reconsult didn't surprise me too much. So just a little bit about the Stage 1 EIS. The key concern, I mean, there's lots of concerns in the marine environment, but the key one is shellfish. And the reason why it's key is it's one that we can get our heads wrapped around in terms of where the outfall goes, because it's regulated. It doesn't mean that we're ignoring all the other potential impacts that could be out there, like to eelgrass and marine life in general, but shellfish is the first place we go to say, where can this thing be positioned? And so the first thing we do is we look at where the tenures are and where the shellfish beds are located. So that's that map. And then we superimpose over that a 400-meter offset, because the regulations say you can't have an outfall terminus within 400 meters of a shellfish bed. So the red areas are no-go. And then this one actually just shows the closure. The bay is closed for all kinds of reasons, by the way, not just effluent from a treatment plant. This is just showing where the embayment line is and the boundary for the CEEMP, Cowichan Estuary Environmental Management Plan boundary. Then after we put the shellfish beds in there, we look at the anchorages, and lo and behold, the little green triangle is the only place we could go in the whole bay. So, and this was 2015. So this is what the anchorages were at that point in time. And so we submitted the amendment on that basis. So then, fast forward to 2018, we picked this thing up again, and we were waiting for the amendment to get signed. I said, this amendment's not getting signed. They're taking forever. So I went to the JV and I said, hey, you know, are you guys okay with me moving ahead with this thing? Because we have funding now, right? And as I said, funding is a good thing unless you have deadlines that you can't meet, and then funding's stressful. And so I said, look, I gotta start going here. So I got permission to proceed with at least the Stage 2 EIS to try to confirm this outfall location. As I was going through that process, I ended up running into a situation where a lot of the First Nations felt that they weren't adequately consulted. And I think it's partially due to passage of time. It's partially due to the fact that a lot of them didn't have the capacity to be consulted. They don't have the staff, they don't have the expertise, they don't have the money in their budgets to hire the expertise. They don't have the staff time, they don't show up to the meetings, or they send somebody else who's not in a position to speak for the band. And so while we thought consultation had happened, in fact, we thought it had happened, but they thought it had not happened sufficiently. So as a result, I've delayed the whole project. I've just pushed the whole thing back. And basically said, I phoned the funders and said, we gotta stop and do consultation. And so that's where I'm at now. So, first thing is I hired a consultant to start looking at the marine environment. What they'll do is they've gone out and gathered samples. They'll use the data that characterizes the marine environment. They'll use our effluent data, and they'll do a plume model, and they'll try to predict where this effluent's going to go. So this is now, this is when we're spending real money. This gets expensive. We also re-engaged with First Nations and the community and environmental groups. There's 11 First Nations that we had to touch base with. We ended up, 5 of them indicated that they didn't feel they needed to be consulted, or they just wanted to be circulated on information. 6 indicated that they wanted to be consulted. So that's a lot of First Nations to consult with on a project like this, and so you can see why I found it necessary to delay the project. The other thing, aside from the outfall terminus that we had to deal with, is the route. The route is extraneous to the amendment, but it's an important component, because if we don't have a route to get to the terminus that the minister signs off on, the terminus isn't all that much help. So the route that we had planned apparently is on a land claim, and it's in the road, it's in the provincial road dedication, but the road dedication is in dispute and it's under land claim, and so basically Cowichan Tribes has said, yeah, we don't think that route's all that good. So I've had to find an alternate route, which has triggered me to do a whole pile of work looking at alternate routes and all the effects that that has on the pressures in the pipe and the pressures at the pump station that we'd have to build and all the cost implications of that. So a little bit about routes. This is the original route, so there's the JUB. And the pipe was going to go along Zuhalem Road all the way down to the West Can Terminal Causeway, and then out, and then the next slide has there's a causeway. Now there's the green triangle, and there's the new terminus location that I ended up coming up with after the anchorages changed. So one anchorage was deleted over here. This one was moved a bit this way. Number 2 shrank. This one shrank. But the key was that this one shrinking, so you can see where the edge of the anchorage would have been there, right? And the other edge would have been there. So by this shrinking and one getting deleted, it allowed me to run the pipe to the embayment line, which is the red line. And so this is about another 1.8 kilometers at $4,000 a meter. So that's like, I don't know, do the math. I'm an engineer, I can't do math anymore. It's a lot of money. But it's the right thing to do. The embayment line is a better place. And so Brian had alluded to the outfall being almost at satellite channel. Well, now it's at satellite channel. And that's what Tribes wanted. We were going to try and get anchorages removed. We were going to go together, Tribes in North Cowichan, and try to get these anchorages removed, and we would have engaged the board with that as well. But as it turns out, it just complete freak luck. I phoned Nanaimo Port Authority, and I said, what are the anchorages like there? Because we're thinking of getting rid of a couple. And he said, well, send me your map. So I sent the map, and he said, that's the wrong map. That's changed now. And this is what he gave me. So this is great news. It adds cost to the project, but I think that it's going to make Cowichan Tribes a little bit happier about the location.
And that was the work of the Cowichan Bay Ship Watch group in Cowichan Bay.
Yeah, and that would have been back in early 2016, I think, that happened. Yeah, very helpful.
Yeah, really.
Yeah. The 2 blue dots, here and here, that's the 93 study. That's where they studied those locations. Now, that's where the stage 1 study came up with, and that's where I'm at now, okay?
What's the diameter of that pipe, and is it going to be buried or is it going to be surface?
It's 750 millimeter diameter pipe, all the way. That's a simple answer. The problem is, depending what route I take, the route gets longer, and the pressures get higher depending on the topography, and so then I run into trouble with pressures where the pipe could burst. So then I have to upsize the pipe to reduce the pressures. And so this is the kind of the game I'm playing right now, is to try to figure out what the best route is. And of course, the pumping costs are huge. Like if you have to pump, one of the routes has a head of 120 meters before you even get to the friction losses in the pipe. So you're at 180 meters maybe. Like it's gigawatts, like 4 gigawatts of power to pump that stuff. So it starts to become a major issue. So it's a tricky bit of business, figuring out the best way to route this thing.
So what is the power outage? To pump this stuff.
Pardon me, say that again, please?
What if there's a power outage?
You have generators. Yeah, you'd have to have standby generation to run at least one pump. Normally, I mean, these are going to be huge pumps. Yeah, I mean, hydros, when they hear this number, they're going to. Oh yeah, yeah, they'll be big. Yeah, I mean, this isn't a big pump station by, you know, go to New York or something. This is tiny, but I mean, it's not like it's not been done. It's just for us, it's big.
Sorry, the marine route would be buried or surface level?
Yeah, I don't know that yet. Ideally, what you do is you build it. Sorry,
No, you're good.
I'm loud enough without the mic?
No, you need the mic, but it's good.
Okay. Normally what you do is you build a pipeline on shore, and you drag it out to the location where you want to drop it, and then you'd fill it with seawater and drop it with these concrete blocks fastened to it, and it would just sit on the ocean floor. One of the concerns is that, and we've heard this from several First Nations, is what does that do to the migration of sea life on the ocean floor, crabs, for example? Like, how do they get over this pipe? And so we brought that up with a consultant, and there, you know, you can put netting on the pipe, and there's ways to deal with it. One way is to bury it, but burying it causes a fair amount of harm too, because you're basically stirring up the bottom of the ocean. So. No, so the way these work is, the anchor has to be within this zone here. And then this zone out here, the yellow line, is the swing zone. And so the concern is we can't be in the swing zone. We were asking, you know, can we go in the swing zone with the pipe? And they said, no, you can't do that. And the reason why is because they can let their chains out, and the chain can drag on the ocean floor, and if it snags one of our concrete blocks, it'll rip the pipe apart. So. Yeah, once this is built, it'll appear on the navigation maps. Well, life is full of risks, I guess, is the answer. But I mean, these guys are not going to want to get into the situation where they rip up an effluent pipe because they're going to have to pay for it. I mean, so the thing is mapped. They're going to, you know, they're going to anchor in these locations here, and they're going to, you know, and we're going to avoid them, and they're going to avoid us. That's the theory. This may be a good spot to start. Any more questions about these maps?
Seeing none, I think some were answered during your presentation.
Okay. Just one thing I wanted to mention here. This little red circle, that's 100 meters radius around the end of the pipe. At that circle, at that edge of that circle, we have to meet the BC Water Quality Guidelines, not our permit, but the BC Water Quality Guidelines at the edge of that zone. We also have to meet a shellfish criteria, which is 14 coliforms per 100 mils. So I was just curious what those numbers are going to be, so I looked at the 93 Dayton and Knight study and did some math, and the coliform concentrations at the edge of that circle are imperceptible. They're like 0.001 or something like that. The yellow circle is the federal exclusion zone for shellfish, and the green circle is the provincial exclusion zone for shellfish. That's the 400 meter number. So if you remember from the previous map, there was those pink zones around the shoreline where the beds were. This green circle can't touch those pink lines. Unfortunately, I couldn't get them on this map. This is just showing this. I actually prepared this slide for the Wasanic First Nations group. They have a leadership council that represents Sartlip, Sycam, Sowet, and we're hoping Pakwachin First Nation, all down on the Saanich Peninsula. And my concern with them was Saanich Inlet, so I wanted to show them where the outfall was, along with the 2,000-meter distance from the outfall terminus. The reason why I picked that was because the Dayton and Knight study predicted concentrations and dilution mixing out to 2,000 meters or 2 kilometers. And so I could give them numbers to explain to them how low some of the concentrations are going to be of some of the constituents we're responsible for. I mean, they're so low you can't even measure them. Okay, they're that low. Shellfish for sure, there's no issue. So that just shows the outfall relative to larger section of the island and ocean. And the current discharge is right there. It's important to remember that with the discharge right now, it goes out the bay already. This is something that people sometimes forget is, you know, what we're doing is we're moving out of the river where there's a higher chance of contact and moving it out here where there's a much lower chance of contact. As for, you know, contact, when you discharge to the ocean, the way it works is the effluent is fresh water and the ocean is seawater, so the effluent will come out the end of the pipe and it'll rise and mix with the seawater. And what the ministry is looking for is for that plume to, as it mixes with the seawater, to become equivalent to the density of the seawater around it. And the plume will actually get trapped below the surface but above the bottom. And that's what you're looking for. And then it disperses and mixes along the way. And the idea there is that you don't have people coming into contact with the effluent from the surface because the plume is trapped down below. Not that there's any harm that would come from it, but it's just a little extra safety. I'll just whip through these slides. These are just some of the samplers that they use. This allows them to sample at depth so they can go down and measure parameter concentrations anywhere in the profile of the ocean. They did current monitoring using acoustic monitors, so they left those out for a period of time to see what the currents were doing. So next, I'm working on trying to confirm routing. This is a problem because Cowichan Tribes has indicated that they're really not interested in discussing routing until the terminus location is settled. So even though the outfall's 1.5 kilometers further out at the embayment line, they still have concerns and they want to see the stage 2 EIS report first. So another reason why I've had to delay the project, because while I'm waiting for the environmental studies to happen, I was hoping I could be doing the routing, but that's not working out so well. So I've delayed the project for that reason. The stage 2 EIS, I just talked to the consultant yesterday, it's going to be ready next week. So I'll be distributing it probably next week. It'll be posted on our website, and I have some instructions how to get access to that information. It'll be draft, and then I'll be doing another round of consultation with the marine consultant, and we'll solicit feedback from various groups, environmental groups, First Nations, the public, on the outcome of that study. I talked about the MOE and the amendment and how we would work cooperatively on that, given that they've delayed so long that their consultation is lining up with our consultation, so we'll just do it together. I'm hoping they'll agree with that. And yeah, we're just going to keep engaging and talking about this project. And one of the things I leave people with is that there's a fair amount of, and understandably so, a fair amount of mistrust out there on the part of First Nations in particular. And just about every meeting I go to, I usually take a shellacking for the first half hour or so. And it's part of the process. And one of the things that's apparent is that a lot of consultation that's happened in the past has been checkbox consultation, they call it, where folks say, well, I met with you 3 times and I have a list of what I did, and so here's what I did, and whether they agree or not doesn't matter. Whether you take into consideration their concerns, it doesn't matter. You submit your report, and then the minister deals with it. We're taking a different approach this time. Back about 5-6 months ago, we started a conversation on capacity funding because we recognized that, particularly down on Saanich Inlet, they just don't have the capacity to consult. So they want to hire their own experts. They've got no money. Their staff don't have the expertise to review the reports. They don't know what they're looking at. They have some sense. So I went to our council and I basically said, we need to do capacity funding. And I phoned the province and the feds and I said, are you okay with me using provincial federal money to do that? And they said, absolutely. And the reason why is because if we don't do it, the last thing we want to have is the amendment goes to the minister and there's a demonstration at the Parliament buildings, 11 First Nations out there screaming that they don't like the amendment. So the project's been delayed. I'm going to spend the next 6 months. I've consulted with Wasanik, which is 4 First Nations, Cowichan Tribes, and Malahat. And it's looking like we're going to need about 6 months to do consultation. We've indicated to all of them we're willing to provide capacity funding so that they can hire their experts and gather their local knowledge and bring it to the fore in the project. And then we'll see what they come up with and what their consultants come up with in terms of the review. And hopefully at the end of this exercise, we'll either have a situation where at least there's no opposition to the project and maybe even some support. We'll see. I'm hopeful that we'll get to no opposition or support because I do think the location's right. At least by Western science standards, it's going to be okay. And I'm confident we can address most of the issues that'll come up, whether it's eelgrass or movement of sea life on the seafloor. I'm confident we can deal with those. It'll be the other issues that come up that may be more difficult to deal with that we're going to have to listen to and try to accommodate. I think that.
Are they each going to have their own consultants, or are they going to share?
Do you want to use the microphone, Director Kuhn, just because if someone's listening, they don't know what Clay's.
Yeah, my question is, are the First Nations each going to have their own consultant, or are they going to share a consultant?
Some are going to have their own consultant, and one has indicated that they don't think they need a consultant because they have the expertise. They're not, they really do, they want to do their own critiquing. They're not really interested in combining forces on a consultant. I don't really want to push that. It's not terribly expensive because they're not doing the report, they're critiquing the report. So they're doing a peer review basically, which is not a terribly expensive thing to do.
Okay.
So I'm fine with that.
Okay, seeing no, there's Director Nicholson. Can you use your microphone, please?
So the $12 million is still intact?
Oh yeah, I should elaborate on that. Yeah, so when I talked to the funders about this, I said, like, we got to do this, and so they said, okay. I said, so what about the funding? Because naturally, my CAO is going like, holy crap, $12 million, right? I said it again. That's right. Holy smokes, that $12 million, is it in jeopardy? And I was feeling the heat, believe me. It was extremely uncomfortable. So what I did was so what's happening is the funding agreements have deadlines that are, I don't have the schedule with me, but they're before the program deadline. The program deadline in some cases is 2 years out from the funding deadline, funding application deadline or funding agreement deadline. So what the funders have said they're willing to do is if there's a good reason to delay the project, they will amend the funding agreements, and there's 2 of them, one with UBCM and the other one's with the New Building Canada Fund. And they would be willing to extend those deadlines to as late as the program deadline. They don't want to do that right now because my schedules, although I have a schedule for the project, and it will fit within the program deadlines, they don't know exactly what's going to happen. And so they said, we don't want to change the agreements twice, so do your First Nations consultation, come back to us when the schedule is a little firmer, and then we'll amend the agreements.
Follow-up, Director Nicholson?
Sure. What kind of an environmental assessment do you have to do to figure out the routing?
There'll be two types of environmental assessments. One will be from the high water mark out to the terminus. So they'll be looking at impacts to sea life, any shellfish beds that happen to be along the alignment. Eelgrass is another one they need to look at. So as part of the sampling program, roughly along the alignment, they've done sediment samples and tissue samples. Tissue samples are more for the plume, by the way, but the sediment samples are for, what is there that we're disturbing. And then the other, so that's being done as part of the Stage 2 EIS by G3. So there's two parts to that EIS, the outfall terminus, the plume modeling, and then the marine pipeline component. Once I get to a route, then we'll start to look at, we'll hire an environmental consultant to work in the project team to sort out any environmental impacts on the route, the terrestrial component. So there's some river crossings, right? So those will have to be looked at because we may be in the riparian area. So there's actually 3 EISs in this project.
Director Salmon?
Thank you. So just on the cost, can you just sketch the overview then? How much is the total estimated cost and how much falls to local government, if any?
So the original estimate for the project done in 2016 was $28 million roughly. 12 million is federal, provincial money. The rest is local government money. And then that's split up based on the share that each jurisdiction in the JUB has in terms of units owned. So
Area D would have 7% of that.
yeah, and E would be a little less than that. Cowichan Tribes would be about 3%. City of Duncan would be about 35, and North Cowichan would be about 55.
Does that 28 million still seem likely, or are we?
Well, I'm up in the numbers. I mean, because if I have to take a different route, it's a longer route. The good news is that the original numbers are Class D estimates, so they have about a 40% contingency allowance in them. So, my hope is that, we'll still be able to keep within that number. But nevertheless, I'm looking at it right now with different routes, depending on the probability of a given route happening, because the route that was originally planned is not going to happen. So, and I'll be retaining a consultant. I've already done a fair amount of work on the pipeline alignments, and there's more than what's shown in that figure that you've got in the presentation. There's a couple more. And I've looked at each one of them, and some of them are better than others, but at least engineering-wise, some are better than others. But they have other challenges, like First Nations land claims. So, do you want to pay more to pump over a hill to avoid a First Nations land claim issue and delay, and it may not be a big delay. We might be able to work something out with Cowichan Tribes. We'll see.
Great. Well, I'd like to thank you very much, Clay. That was super informative, and we hadn't had a meeting in a while, so I was wondering, so that really brought myself up to speed, and appreciate all your work.
Yeah, I was to get in front of the CVRD on this project, because it had been so long since we talked about it, and we've had a few road bumps, so.
Yep, I see that.
Yeah.
Director Nicholson.
Yeah, thanks, Clay. I really appreciate your work. I'm also wondering where we're going with that biosolid question.
Oh. Well, it's not going to where we were going to go.
What, are we going to do any community consultations or not?
Yeah, so I've talked to Hamid about that, and what I'm thinking is probably the best way to go, so first of all, I found an alternate solution. An alternate solution has come up in the meantime, and I think I passed that information on to you. And that'll probably take care of us for the next 5 years.
Oh, good.
So we'll do with Hamid more. I think we should do kind of a public education, information, outreach kind of thing to get people a little more comfortable with it. I can tell you that when I was doing a presentation on that somewhere else, I had one person say to me, geez, you know, can you make a business out of this? And I said, well, holy smokes, like, let's just wait and deal with it, our own material, rather than starting to take in other people's material. So once people start to understand the regulations and the issues or non-issues, then they start to look at it a little differently. But people definitely have to come to some comfort with those kinds of things, for sure.
Is there a follow-up, Director Nicholson?
Well, I just think that as a community, you know, it's an issue. We create all these biosolids, and we need to deal with them and not just ship them up island or wherever.
Yeah, I agree.
Thank you. Okay, moving on now to our new business. I'd like to call Kasia.
So speaking of effluent
Yeah,
and
carry
grant
on.
deadlines,
Carry on.
we're going to continue on that conversation.
Yeah, there we go.
So I am here today to provide an update on the official community plan and rezoning application that came to you in December 15th of 2018 regarding Honeymoon Bay Timber West proposal to rezone the lands. Just to provide a reminder, because it has been quite a while, this is the lots that we're talking about. Currently 3 lots, Lot 1, Lot A, and Lot 2. So at that EAC meeting, the recommendation that was put forward was for drafts to be prepared, draft covenants to be prepared for the public hearing regarding the transfer of the utility lot. That was a community amenity contribution that the applicant proposed to put forward, as well as a park dedication. So I'll just show you once again. The area in gray is the utility lot, and the area in green that's not hatched is the proposed parkland dedication. And so at that time, the committee agreed to with that recommendation, as well as moving forward with the public hearing. And on January 9th, 2019, the board gave that approval. So since then, staff have been working with the applicant to get these draft covenants prepared, and the applicant has decided that they wanted to have their lawyer prepare the first draft of the covenant and then have our lawyer review it, so that's fine. But we've had some conversations back and forth regarding the agreement about the utility lot. So originally, the discussions were that the concurrent boundary adjustment that's currently occurring right now with the Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure, which you can see here, would readjust the parcel boundaries in order to actually be able to create that utility lot. And the hope was that this would be occurring concurrently with this rezoning application, and that the land could be transferred as a condition of the OCP and rezoning application. However, the applicant has informed us that it's going to take 3 to 4 months to survey the property in order to be able to actually create the parcel, which is not aligned with this rezoning and the grant deadline that we're working with, which is a year from today, everything being complete. So they came back with a request that a statutory right-of-way agreement be put together, and that the statutory right-of-way be provided and granted to the CBRD at approval, not prior to. We received advice from our lawyer on this, and they advised against a statutory right-of-way agreement for various reasons. And we provided an option back to them, which would be applying the portion of the Land Title Act, which allows a transfer of public allow the transfer of lands for public good without having to go through the Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure. So it's actually a really great opportunity for us to be able to continue forward with this process. But that would also be the condition that the land would be transferred over between third and fourth reading. But the applicant is not too keen on that agreement, and they would like to have the land transferred over at approval. So we'll give it to you if you give us the land. So I'm here today because we received further advice from our lawyer, and one of the options that's available is that Timber West would transfer over the parcel as a condition of approval, but we would have an unregistered agreement to transfer the land back to Timber West in the event that the OCP and rezoning bylaw is not fully adopted within a certain period of time. And this agreement would have to actually be approved by the CVRD board. So I wanted to come to you today, just so you're aware that this may be an option coming forward to you for consideration. I'm still in negotiations with the applicant, but I just wanted to provide you some context and some sense of where we're at, because it has been 3 months since you last saw this. And that concludes my presentation.
Thank you. And this is for information?
That is correct.
Yes. Thank you very much. Are there any questions for Kasia? Seeing none. Thank you very much. Moving on now to question period. Is there anyone in the audience that wishes to address the chair with a question? Not statements of opinions. And questioners are not permitted to make a speech. How do you like that? You're off for a speech today.
Just a question.
Okay.
I would like to ask what the specific issues that need to be addressed for this committee to come for a yes vote for my application.
We can't give you that because we've actually referred it back to the staff for more information to us, for us to look at.
Am I to give you that information?
Staff will be presenting us with that information.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Shea. Hello. Microphone.
It's
Yeah,
on
now
now.
it is.
I have 2 questions, if I'm permitted.
I'll see what I can do.
The first question is, in the current A2 zoning, does it not provide for 30% of a property to be in outbuildings?
Oh, gosh. Out of the blue, I can't answer that one. Does staff have an answer?
If I may, I'm
For me?
referring to the book that was left on the chair.
Oh, a book that was left on the chair.
It's got A2 zoning, and it says for any parcel in the A2 zone, the parcel coverage shall not exceed 30% for all buildings and structures. So,
You could ask that of staff after our meeting. 'Cause
okay,
that to
I'm
me-
asking here because there was some concern about the size of the 11,000 square foot building.
Right.
When that is actually 3 to 4% of my property and falls within the 30%. That was my question. The other question I have is, a manual was distributed to everybody. Is that correct? Did everybody receive it? Excuse me. In that manual, was it not addressed regarding the water, the odor, and the noise mitigations?
Correct,
If
yes.
it was not addressed to your understanding, or if you want any more information, could you please let us know?
Sure, we will do.
Thank you.
Staff will do. Thank you. Now, we have no closed, I don't believe. And I'd like to call for a motion to adjourn. Moved, second, all in favor, any opposed, motion's carried. 5 minutes to go into, thank you.